goody, guys? Welcome back to Wind Down with Books with your girl Kay. By the title, you could see that we are reviewing Don't Cry For Me, right? It was book of the month. I'm hands down gonna rate this book. To me, 5 stars. I love the book. I love the book. You'll see why I enjoyed the read. I definitely think that the book is worth reading, especially for those black men who are seeking some level of understanding for the healing that they have gone through, especially those who identify with the LGBTQ community. Anyways, so we're gonna jump right into it. Nothing but to do it. I don't have any wine. It's the middle of the day, so that's why I'm not drinking any wine. But I do have water. But I hope you guys have your wine. Let's get into it. All right, so the book starts off. Well, I don't want to say the book starts off. The book is about a man named Jacob, and he's writing letters to his son who identify as a gay black male, right? Jacob is dying of cancer, and Jacob decides that he's going to write these letters because he is unable to communicate exactly how he feels, what he wants to say to his son Isaac verbally. So the only way to do it is through written form, right? He's in his, not last days, he has some time, so he's writing the letters and is basically explaining who he is as a man, how he came about to have the mindset that he does, why his parenting style was the way it was, and why he did what he did and said the things that he did, right? So let's see, you already know if I'm looking down, I always have my notes, right? So Jacob is from the South. He's from Arkansas, right? During those times, Jacob grew up with an authoritarian figure, his grandfather, who was strict, and he grew up with his grandmother, right? He had a brother named Esau. Unfortunately, his brother Esau, was his older brother, he passed away, right? So when Esau passed away, Esau never forgave God for killing, well, not killing his brother, but taking his brother's life, right? He felt like Esau was too young to die. Esau was the person that he looked up to the most. He admired Esau. He wanted to be like Esau. He had an infatuation with his brother. It was a healthy infatuation, just a younger brother really loving on his older brother, right? So when Esau died, it really broke his spirit, right? But on top of that, Jacob grew in a household where he had to work, right? He had to work day in and day out to help his family provide for each other. He went to school periodically, and for the most part, Jacob was not dumb. Like, he could read a little bit, but had he continued going to school, he would have been, I feel like he would have been a phenomenal student, right? But unfortunately, during those times, you had to choose education or your livelihood, survival. Obviously, you're gonna choose survival, right? So, and that's the times where, their ancestors, their family, friends, transitioning from slavery, even though I still think we're still in some kind of form of slavery, but transitioning from slavery times, and it's hard. And I had wrote down in my notes, like, during slavery time, men weren't taught to love. They were taught to respect. During those times, men were not taught to be in tune, to be attached with their emotions. Like, showing emotions was a sign of weakness to them. So it's tough love. Like, the way they love was, I respect you. If I respect you, I love you. But it's never, I love you. They didn't show affection, whether it was verbally, whether it was physical, none of that. So that's how Jacob grew up. Jacob didn't grow up knowing what real love is, how to express his feelings, how to really love someone. He didn't even really love himself, to be honest with you. That's my opinion. He didn't really love himself. So he struggled with that, right? So during the time when Jacob would go to school, the time that he did go to school, he hung out with boys for the most part. And there was this one specific situation in the book that really, like, kind of broke my heart a little bit, right? So there was a boy named Elliot. So Elliot was he was lighter toned, back in the day they called it fair skin, right? He had good hair, he was well mannered. The ladies loved him, right? He had everything that Jacob and the other boys wanted. So during that time, they thought that Elliot was gay, right? He was funny acting. That's what they call it, funny acting, right? So one day, they cornered Elliot and made Elliot perform oral sex on the boys, minus Jacob and his other friend. Jacob didn't partake in that, but he stood there and watched. He actually beat up on Elliot, and it just was like, what? And then the next day, Elliot was so traumatized about what he went through, he killed himself, and Jacob never forgave himself for that. Honestly, how could you? Like, you drove this boy to his death because of how he looked. And that's self-hatred. Unfortunately, white people has, what's the word I'm looking for? Has made black people want to hate themselves, because the way that we look is not the way that society views it as a norm. That's a straight up fact, right? And I reviewed a book called The Bluest Eyes by Toni Morrison. If you haven't read that, read it, because it's a deep reading, and it goes through how men are viewed in society. Black females are viewed in society against white people. That's it. But anyways, moving forward, right? So I'm gonna skip a little bit. I don't want this to be too long, right? So I'm gonna skip that. All right. After a while, death had surrounded Jacob. He grew up with his grandparents, I forgot to mention, because his father was a no-show and his mother was killed, right? So, death just ultimately surrounded him. He just was becoming numb, but he didn't have an outlet to release. So, all that built up anger, you know how that goes, right? So anyways, fast forward. He married a woman named Rachel, right? So Rachel and him got married. They relocated to the city, right? I should mention, one thing about his family, that they had a lot of land in Arkansas. Like, they had acres. Was it 300 acres? So they had land. Like, they was well off, and they was doing things. They had a good life for themselves for the most part, right? So he decided that he's gonna move to the city, because from what he's told, the city is a better way of living. So he marries Rachel. They move to the city, right? During that time, Rachel, before they got married, Rachel would tell him, like, I have bigger dreams for myself. I want to go to school. I want to graduate from college. She was an independent woman. She, like, no matter what, she had goals, she had aspirations, she was going to achieve that no matter what. And she was a smart woman. She could read, she could articulate herself. She didn't need a man. Like, that's what it was. But she just fell in love with this country boy. She's from the city, he's from the country. She fell in love with him, and, they moved. Right? So she ends up getting pregnant with Isaac. So when Isaac was born, Jacob was like head over heels. He kissed him, he hugged him, he showed affection. Like, what he wanted as a young child, he was able to show affection, right? He got a little hint of it with his brother Esau. Like, Esau would like kiss his forehead and stuff like that, and I feel like that's what he geared towards Esau so much, because he was able to feel a different level of love from his brother that he never felt from anybody, right? So that same display of affection, he did it to his son Isaac when Isaac was born, right? As Isaac grew up, Isaac didn't participate in the normal norms of what people view boys as, right? So Isaac did not like sports. He didn't like playing sports. He didn't like rough play. Like, what Isaac liked to do, he liked to draw, he liked to paint, he loved music. Like, those are the things. So, like, Jacob was taken aback. He's like, from little, he could see that Isaac was a little different, because he didn't like what regular boys like. So because he started recognizing that, he started pushing Isaac away. Like, oh, like, what? Like, you funny acting? I can't love you. I won't love you. I refuse to love you. And I'm like, this is your child. Like, just because he likes different things doesn't mean that he's so-called funny acting, right? So Rachel during this time would be like, yo, like, just because he likes different things doesn't mean he's funny acting. Like, you're supposed to love him the same way. But Jacob thing was that, oh, I'm never going to be able to go to sports games with my son, or do manly thing, because he doesn't like that. And I'm just like, that's the problem with men
and back then, men now, like, y'all always want to force these boys to do sports. Like, it's okay for men to dance and cook and stuff that y'all view for women to do. It doesn't make them less of a man. Like, come on. I feel like they're projecting onto their kids. That's what it is. But anyways, right? So during that time, Jacob would force Isaac to do these things, and Isaac hated it, and Jacob dismissed any feelings that Isaac had, any reservations that Isaac had. He would dismiss it, like, you're gonna do this, like, this is what you're doing, I don't care, right? Because to Jacob, Isaac not being the ideal picture of a boy equaled him failing as a father, and he didn't want to be judged about from his peers, right? So he barely talked to Isaac, like he would, and then when he did talk to him, like, he would talk crazy, he would spank him, like stuff like that. It was like, in the book, it was really pissing me off, but I had to continue the book to understand where he was coming from. And all of it was learned behavior, because his grandfather would beat him for saying little things, doing little things. So it's like, that's learned behavior. He parented the way that he knew. He didn't know any way of parenting. He didn't know what is gentle parenting. So I understand that. If you show him one way, you don't know how to, you still stuck in that mindset, so you don't know how to come out of that, right? So at the same time, Rachel, his wife, like, time is passing by, she begins to resent Jacob, right? She resents Jacob because her dreams of going to school and graduate, stuff like that, fell short because she became a wife. She had to stay home, take care of a child, and she didn't pursue anything. And Rachel, within herself, she's probably feeling like, I settled for a man that I don't really think I loved. I settled for a man and he's achieving what he can, but what am I doing? You get what I'm saying? I'm just like, who am I, right? So she's struggling with her own internal feelings. So at that time, she starts volunteering at a women's shelter for those who are experiencing domestic violence. She starts reading this book called Feminism, Mystique, I think? Mystique? Yeah, Mystique. And she's taking back her power. She's standing up for herself. And whenever Jacob would come for Isaac and try to come at him, she would defend her son. Like, she would stand up to Jacob, like, don't touch my son. My son is not, he's talented. And he really was handsome. He could play the piano good. He could paint really good. So she's like, I'm going to protect my son at all costs. And she started viewing Jacob as a monster. And Jacob was a monster. In Jacob's mind, he's protecting his son and building his son up to be for character, right? In Rachel's mind, she's allowing her son to be free, to explore the things that he loved, right? She doesn't think that I keep getting their names mixed up. Isaac is funny actor. She just think that he's in tune with who he is as an individual, and he has every right to be, and she's gonna love him no matter what. So in Rachel's mind, her son is not attracted to males. As Isaac grows up, Jacob sees that Isaac is attracted to males. He recognized the signs, and I guess because he's seen it growing up, right? So whenever Jacob would come on and say that, Rachel would be like, yo, like, what's good with you? But had Jacob learned to really communicate effectively, like, he could have communicated that to not only Isaac but to Rachel in a positive manner. But all he knew was to communicate with abuse, negativity. So it was never gonna go anywhere, right? There was a situation, right? So Isaac, he liked theater, so he played Orphan Andy. Is like a spin-off from Orphan Annie, right? And he was phenomenal in the play. He had to dress up with the costume. He had the little red hair, whatever, right? So after the play, Jacob was just like disgusted. Like, when I mean disgusted about his son playing in this play and dancing around the stage, and the other fathers coming up like, I would never let my son do that. I would never let my son da 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 da. He was disgusted. He didn't congratulate his son or none of that. He just walked away from him. And like, what he did after was like, I think they went to dinner. He was like, "Are you a sissy?" Like, he said that to his son. I was just like, like, not only maybe your son is getting attacked at school or by his peers, but by his parents too. Like, you brought him into this world to protect him, but you're bringing him down just like other people. Like, what was the point, right? It just pissed me off. Like, it just pissed me off. Like, I understood like why he was writing the letters and all that, forgiveness and all that, but it pissed me off. But anyways, so right as the relationship goes on, Jacob and Rachel, like, their relationship is just is dead, right? She really, really hates him. There was one point where Jacob really beat Isaac, like, beat him so bad. And Isaac could not forgive or look at Jacob afterwards. Like, he hated him, right? And it was just like, yo, like, what's wrong with you? But I skipped a part, right? Long story short, before that beating, you know, Jacob and Isaac visited Jacob's hometown, Arkansas. And, you know, that's a time when they was bonding a little bit, right? During this time, you know, Jacob and Isaac had watched Roots, and from the Roots, that's why they traveled back to home to learn about the family, stuff like that. And that's where Jacob was like, you know, this is what I want with my son. I want him to learn his roots. I want him to learn where he comes from, to understand that he has land. He has a place where he could go to if anything were to happen to us. And, you know, he showed him where he grew up. He showed him where he played, etc., etc. He also showed him where his brother was buried, right? During that time, there was a scene in the book where he went to his brother's grave. He went to his grandmother's grave, right? And Isaac also had a gift where he could speak to the dead, right? And, you know, Jacob realized that. So Jacob is standing at the cemetery. He's going through it, like, and then Isaac is saying, like, you know, your grandma's okay, they're standing third, right? And there's a part where Isaac reaches to hold his father's hand, and Jacob pulls away. And Isaac felt that energy and was crying and stuff like that. And at that time, Jacob wanted to hold Isaac's hand. He wanted to show that faith. He wanted to be that father, but he could not be it because of the idea that his son is different from other boys, and his son likes boys. He can't, because he doesn't agree with that, he cannot love his son and value his son the way that he needs to be. And it was eating him up inside, right? He just refused to get over his pride and love his son and hug his son in that moment. And I was just like damn. And I feel like maybe a lot of men go through that now. Like, maybe a lot of men go through that. They never learned affection, so when it's time to display affection, you know, it's hard for them. But at the end of the day, this is your child. You have to get over your pride. Not even get over your pride. Get through your pride, right? See, this is your child. Break those generational curses and barriers, and do what you need to do as a father. But he just couldn't do it. And Isaac, in that sense, I feel like if I was Isaac, I would, for real, like, that's that. So after the trip, you know, that's Jacob killed the bond right there after he did that, right? So I wrote during this in my notes, right, that one thing that stood out to me was that in the book, a lot of black people left their land that they obtained, you know, with the whole 40 acres in them, and when white people were selling their land and stuff like that, thinking big things of the city and moving to the city, but they end up being far worse than when they started. Like, you go to the city, you homeless, there's food scarcity, you don't have no food, you don't have no job, like, and then they decide to stay in that situation instead of going back home to where they come from. But also, you know, the family situations attributed to why they stay in the city. But it's just like, I started thinking, like, you know, that's true. A lot of people who come from the country, they come to the cities, sometimes they don't make it, and instead of going back home where, you know, you can grow your own food, you have a place to stay, you have land, like, they don't go back. And I wondered about that, especially reading this book. But anyways, and they also succumb to, like, drugs and etc. They exposed to a number of different drugs when you go to this city, right? It's fast moving. So there was, so fast forward. I'm sorry, guys. All right, let me see. So we're gonna fast forward a little bit, right? There was a letter that Jacob wrote that was describing how the mother wanted Isaac to be free, right? Then at one point in time, Isaac had told his mom that he thinks he's different, like as far as liking boys, right? So Rachel calls up Jacob going crazy, like, this is your son, you need to speak to him, he thinks he's funny acting, this will not be tolerated. So Jacob is like, he's quiet, he's not saying anything, and Rachel's going on, and that completely shocked me, because in my mind, if you read the book or you do plan to read the book, you'll see that in my mind, I believe that she knew that her son like boys, and she was accepting of it. So when he finally decides to tell his mother, the person that who's been protecting him and loving him and allowing him to be himself, she did a complete freaking 180 on my boy and was like, this will not be tolerated. Like, nah, you gotta chill. You gotta like girls. So Jacob was telling her, Rachel, like, I told you, I warned you about this. This is nothing new. You decided to stop me along the way when I was trying to parent him and make him a boy. Now this is your problem to deal with. And I'm just like, Isaac just must have been like, what the hell? Like, he was probably shocked. Like, to think that the parent that support you really don't support you. But he did exhibit signs of liking boys. But I mean, he's telling you he felt comfortable enough to tell you, like, this is what he's feeling at this time, right? And you went crazy. So the next day, Jacob and him went for a ride, and that's when Isaac was like, Dad, I was just confused. Like, I'm not into boys. Like, I don't know why I said that. Like, you have nothing to worry about, right? So as time goes by, Isaac starts bringing girls over. He's dating girls, so his parents is happy. Like, oh my gosh, like, my son is dating girls. They like, yeah, it was just a phase, right? So both of them are happy. Their marriage is still going to shit, right? And then there was a time where the girls stopped coming over, and then it was time for Isaac's prom, right? So prior to that, Isaac used to bring a boy home named Ricky, right? They was close, so the mother thought that it was just like their best friends. Like, Isaac finally has a male friend that he can hang out with. Jacob was like, nah, like, he coming over too much. I see how my son look at him. I see how this boy look at my son. Like, he knew what time it was, but he was like, nah, like, he still was in denial, because he's like, Isaac was bringing home girls, and even though it stopped, like, he's not thinking nothing of it. When Isaac was coming back from prom, he was having to leave the house. Jacob having to leave the house and seeing Ricky and Isaac kissing, right? And his whole world just shattered right then and there. It just shattered right then and there. And he never to that day, Jacob decided that he wasn't going to tell a soul. He was still going to be in denial. He never told Rachel, right? Because Rachel had her hopes up that her son was a heterosexual male. And then from that day, that's when Jacob officially stopped showing interest in Isaac. Like, he graduated from high school, he went away to college, but he was just like, congratulations. He barely spoke to him. He paid his tuition and stuff like that, but he had no interaction with Isaac. And Isaac hated his father. He still hates his father. And as much as Jacob wanted to be that parent that he knew he could be, he couldn't do it. His pride took over him, right? So, during this time, Jacob starts going through some things mentally, as well as Rachel, but he's really, really going through it, right? And he gets introduced to a book, the Malcolm X book, and he's starting to read more and stuff like that. I should mention that Isaac enjoyed reading, Rachel enjoyed reading, they enjoyed educating themselves, right? So Jacob reads Malcolm X, and he really learns that a lot of black people only accept themselves as being black, but they never embrace it. And embracing it means embracing your skin tone, embracing what it means to be a black male or black woman, embracing the struggles that we go through, embracing and loving yourself and understanding yourself and understanding where you come from, and that it's not a bad thing to be black, right? And that embracing it can help with your healing journey, right? So he starts reading all these powerful books, and he's getting an understanding of who he is, right? And from him deciding to read these books, this is where the thought to write these letters come about. At the same time, like, Jacob is low-key communicating with Death in a way. Death is a woman in the book, right? And Death is extending his time on earth to write these letters to Jacob, right? So, you know, during the time he's writing the letters, he's sick. Like, there's periods where he has to stop because, you know, he's not having a good day. So that's a whole nother thing. Like, I like that it was like today, like January 14, what was it, like 2003? There's that, like, today, detailing like his journey, his sickness journey, as well as his journey as writing a letter, right? So I also enjoyed the fact that he started reading more. Reading is fundamental, and he was reading informative books, right? Informative books that can help him with his healing journey and understanding and processing and really, like, he was wrong. And there was also a point where, I'm skipping ahead, Jacob realized that, you know, the monster that he saw his grandfather as, because his grandfather, I'm getting far ahead. Anyways, his grandfather, I should just say that. Yeah, let me just skip ahead. His grandfather, tried to attempt to kill his mother, right? His grandfather would beat his grandmother, in which he learned that, you know, his grandfather saw at third hand that his grandmother never had an outlet to speak her mind because she was scared. And he was doing the same thing to Rachel. His grandfather made his grandmother obedient, right? And he did the same thing to Rachel. He understood, like, he was the same monster that he hated. He was the same monster of his grandfather that he hated growing up, and he was no different. And I was so glad that he recognized that, because I'm just like, everything that he detailed in the book, I'm like, you're doing the same thing. Like, what? The only difference is that Rachel was able to say, F you, I'm taking back my power, I will kill you if I have to. Because that's the type of woman Rachel was. And I was like, yes, Rachel, yes, do not let a man put you where he thinks you need to be. You be your own person in a relationship, and you have to leave his ass if you need to. And she left his ass because she had enough, right? But one thing I could say I respected about Jacob was that although they divorced and he left the home, he still paid for the home. He still paid for his son's education. Like, I did respect that. Regardless of that, he was determined to take care of the bills because he felt that it was his responsibility, which it is. Because some men would be like, you know, F that, whatever. Like, they don't agree with something, they're not doing that. So that's the part I could say I respected about Jacob. I also respected that, you know, he went on the journey of self-actualization, self-healing, self-awareness. And it took him a while. It took him abandoning his son to do it. And, well, not abandoning his son. It took him being on his deathbed to do it. Which I'm just like, come on. But there's a part in the book I didn't get to yet, right? So anyway, he becomes a new man. He starts seeing life differently. Rachel dies, right? And Isaac comes home for the funeral. After the funeral, Isaac is sitting in his mother's room. He's talking to her spirit. He's like, you know, I don't want anything to do with Dad. Like, he didn't want anything to do with me. I have no intentions of having a relationship, right? During that time, because Jacob has become a new man, he wanted a relationship with his son, and he thought that, okay, after Rachel died, they could rekindle some kind of relationship and do father-son things. Isaac shut that down. Jacob overheard him, and then he's just like, you know, after the funeral, Isaac went his way, Jacob went his way, right? Jacob's talking to Death like, you know, I just need more time, right? So Jacob went back to Arkansas. He missed his home. That's where he learned the history of his mother, and that his mother was rebellious. His mother, she was a good girl. She was outspoken. She was brave, and your grandfather didn't like that. And that's when she had got pregnant at one time. And during that time, when you got pregnant out of wedlock, you know, the people in the community wanted to judge you and banish you and make it a public display and make you apologize in front of everybody. His mother refused to do that, right? And the grandfather they was in a barn together, and the grandfather had pushed his mother, and the mother had a miscarriage, but she was never the same after that. And then, long story short, his mother got killed by the father. The father ran off, and you know, that's how he learned. So he learned about his family history, right? And I was just like, you know, trauma and generational curses followed this man, right, throughout his whole life, and he had no idea. Then there was a situation where Jacob was like, you know, I want to make amends with my son, right? I want him to know that I care for him and stuff like that. So at one point, he decided that he was going to drive because Isaac was now living in Chicago. So he was going to drive to Chicago, right? He starts driving to Chicago, but he never finished it because his pride wouldn't let him. His pride and his guilt, right? He started feeling guilty, like, what if I get there? He doesn't want to talk to me. He doesn't want a relationship. And all of that started filling his mind, and he turned back around. So in his letter, he made a note. He noted that, you know, I tried to come to you. Although it wasn't successful, I just want you to know that I did try. I was on the way, and I turned around. Because his main thing was that he did want Isaac to know, like, I recognize what I did to you. I hurt you. I do want your forgiveness, and I know some of the things I've done was unforgivable, but I did try. But he tried in his own way. And although he did come to some actualization of who he is and who he wanted to be as a man, you know, he still let those past guilty feelings and emotions and situations determine his future with his son, because he would start praying to God, like asking God to bring Isaac back to him. But Jacob said the wrong prayer. Jacob had to say, you know, bring me to my son. So and this was in the book too, while Jacob is praying for Isaac to come back to him, Isaac is probably praying for his dad to come to him, because at the end of the day, it wasn't Isaac's responsibility to mend the problems between him and his father. It was his father, because Isaac did nothing wrong but be himself. He did nothing wrong but be himself. He didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask to be beat on, to be called a sissy. He didn't ask to grow up in that family. So it was Jacob's responsibility, and it was just like, you know, you call yourself a man, but you won't do manly duties, right? You won't man up in the way that you need to emotionally, right? So are you really a man? Because his idea of being a man is going to work, paying the bills, and that's it. That's not being a man. I would worship, well, I don't want to say worship, that's a strong word. I commend any man who is attached to their feelings, who wants to dig deep into their feelings, who can cry. I would love that. You know why? Because it showed me that you could be vulnerable. It showed me that you could open up, that I could get to understand you. A man that hides his feelings and really never show you who he is, I don't want that. I wouldn't want that, right? And then there was a situation in the book that Jacob had a friend named Charlie. Charlie's son is in the NFL. Charlie gets a call that his son was beaten, right? Charlie goes to see his son and finds out that his son is gay, right? During that time, you know, being that Jacob is a changed man, he could have spoke to Charlie and about his son, right? And help Charlie see, like, you know, you still gotta love your son no matter what, because Charlie was like, how could he be like this? Like, I don't want no gay son that's ungodly, right? But Jacob chose not to say anything. And I mean, I can see why, you know, the two sides of it. Like, you don't want to put your son's business out there or whatever, but at the same time, it's just like, this was this could have been a test, like, to say, you know, acknowledge that you accept your son for who he is after, you know, going on your healing journey, and allowing giving Charlie the insight not to do the same things that you did to your son. But he didn't say nothing. He stayed quiet. I was just like, come on, man, you still embarrassed. Like, you still embarrassed, right? And then towards the end of the book, he realized that he needed Isaac. He never talked to Isaac once Isaac had moved back to Chicago. And then in his letters, he finally told Isaac to embrace himself for who he is, and that means being a black homosexual male, you know, and love himself for who he is, and, you know, try not to make the mistakes that he did. And if he told Isaac, if you did make the mistakes that I did, you know, learn from it, understand it, apologize for it, you know, because he didn't want how his parenting style to really affect Isaac as he grew up. It already did, but he didn't want him to affect Isaac in a negative manner, right? I thought the letters was beautiful. I would have loved to hear Isaac's side, right, of his journey, his life. I would love to have read Isaac's perspective of receiving the letters, right? I would have loved to just see, like, what was his thought process. For me, and I would have been like, I wanted that side. But understanding Jacob's story was beautiful, because it shows that, you know, a lot of our black men are traumatized, and they don't have an outlet or way to understand what they're feeling and to deal with what they're feeling. They take it out on the people that they love the most. And, you know, because Jacob didn't understand why two men could like each other, you know, that led to hate. And it's just like, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that you have to hate it, right? And I think this goes for a lot of black males who children are coming out as members of the LGBT community, whether it's a female or male. Like, just because you don't understand it, you know, doesn't mean that you have to stop loving your child. You know, educate yourself, right? Ask your children questions. But just because you may not agree with it, and you still may not agree with it after you talk to your kids, but if you love your children, you will accept them no matter what. Because at the end of the day, we have all done some questionable shit. We have all done some questionable shit. Just because you may not be homosexual doesn't mean being heterosexual is any better. You know, you have done some stuff. So I think this book provided a lot of insight and understanding, and shows why black men need to go on a healing journey, especially when generational barriers and curses follow you through. Like, you have to break those barriers in order to be a better person, or you're going to be stuck in the same cycle. I grant this book a 5 stars. Like I said, I really enjoyed the read. I definitely will read this book again. And yeah, so if you read the book, drop it in the comments. If you plan to read it, drop it in the comments. Again, I still don't know what the next book review is. I'm just going, you know, life is a little busy for me right now. But other than that, I appreciate everybody who continue to watch my videos. Like, share, subscribe, follow me on TikTok, Instagram. And until next time, your girl is out.